welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Karen Curvin, president of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Sentinel Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Bank of the Cascades, Family Care Health Plans, Legacy Health, Russell Fellow Properties, The Standard, and Stoll Reeves. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. We are pleased to welcome back Civic Scholars from David Douglas High School today. Civic Scholars is our initiative to expand opportunities for high school students to more deeply engage in Portland's civic issues, bringing civic education out of the classroom and into the community. This morning, prior to the forum, they had their own Q&A with Nicole Maher, today's moderator, and president and CEO of Northwest Health Foundation. Students, please stand if you are able. Welcome to Friday Forum. City Club is where people who love Portland work together to help solve our biggest problems. Now is your chance to love Portland back. If you're already a member of City Club, help others get involved. If you join or renew between now and May 31st, you will save $25. You can join after today's program. Just connect with a City Club staff member, or you can join online at www.pdxcityclub.org/join. Join us on Tuesday for civic drinks at the Goodfoot. We have invited arts organizations, nonprofits, and businesses for a night of networking. Next Friday is the State of the State with Governor Brown. We are sold out of lunch tickets for this event. A limited number of general admission tickets will be available for City Club members and will be released on Tuesday, April 14th at noon. You'll need a reservation, whether for lunch or general admission, to attend the forum that day. If you do not have a reservation, you can watch live at pdxcityclub.org/live. Do you know organizations or individuals that are doing great work to inspire civic engagement? Nominate them for City Club Civic Awards. Nominate or apply by Tuesday, April 14th. The half-pagers that were on your seats have more information. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. And as always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. After our program today, Nicole Maher will facilitate a question and answer session with our panelists. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all audience members, please locate the index cards on your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high, and a City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of Q&A. And now for our program. Today, Nicole Maher will lead a discussion on lessons learned, barriers in grant making, and how organizations prioritize funding to encourage equitable giving. Sharon Gary Smith was born in Oregon and has worked locally and nationally for racial and economic justice. She brings over 2 decades of experience in philanthropy to her role as executive director of MRG Foundation. Keith Tomajan leads the United Way of the Columbia Willamette as president and CEO. Breaking the cycle of childhood poverty is United Way's signature and singular goal. Last May, the organization committed $8.2 million to dozens of carefully vetted local charities. Kevin Walker is the Northwest Area Foundation president and CEO. Kevin leads the foundation's efforts to champion programs that increase good jobs and financial capability for low-income people across 8 states. 40% of new grant dollars go to Native-led organizations that advance genuine opportunities for communities to thrive on their own terms. Max Williams leads the Oregon Community Foundation as the president and CEO. Oregon Community Foundation annually awards more than $60 million in grants and scholarships to improve life in Oregon and promote effective philanthropy. Nicole June Maher joined Northwest Health Foundation as president and CEO in August 2012. Nicole is the youngest president of a major foundation in the Northwest and has led the organization through a significant transformation. Northwest Health Foundation has become a champion of advocacy, policy, and supporting vulnerable populations to be leaders in creating healthy families and communities across Oregon and Southwest Washington. Northwest Health Foundation is proud to have a minority board and staff and to give over 70% of its resources to communities of color. Nicole is also a board member of City Club. Please join me in welcoming our guests to the stage.
Well, first let me thank and appreciate our sponsors and really appreciate the level of participation and the attendance today in the audience. It's heartwarming to see such a deep interest in the work of philanthropy and in the commitment that philanthropy has been demonstrating towards eliminating disparities. I'm really excited about the panel that we have for you today. We couldn't have asked for a group of folks who have shown more commitment and demonstrated more goodwill and effort towards the effort of ending inequality. And so I'm just really pleased with the group that we have today and the conversation that we're going to have. So this isn't a new conversation. Actually, philanthropy's been really thinking about this for quite some time. And actually, the first report that came out in Oregon really discussing inequities in philanthropy came out in 1980. And if you look at that report, it really tells you many of the same stories as the report that came out in 2010, which was a partnership of grantmakers of Oregon and Southwest Washington and the Coalition and Communities of Color. And what those reports told us is that while philanthropy was vibrant and active in Oregon, and while we knew that there was a greater representation of people of color in poverty and represented along a continuum of disparities, the amount of philanthropic dollars reaching those communities was not as significant as the populations were, and certainly not as significant as the need. Now, that report came out in 2010, and while it was a difficult report to read, and while it was challenging to hear that, we've actually had several foundations, many more that are represented on this stage, really look at that and think about the ways that they could make an impact, and to really think about the role that they had in resolving that issue. The other thing that's important to note is that philanthropy has been really grappling with this issue and really trying to think about how we can work collectively to learn from each other and really invite communities to help us think about how we can be the best partner. And that's really the spirit and the hope that we have today, to really have an honest dialogue about the important impact that philanthropy has, what philanthropy is trying to do to address inequalities, share the lessons that we have learned, but also to share the message that this is work that will probably never be done, and that we as organizations really want to be vulnerable and thoughtful in our journey, share it, and invite other industries and sectors to join us in this work. So to start with, I'd actually like to invite each of our panelists to share a little bit about who they are. In philanthropy, there's many different types of foundations, and we have a fantastic group really representing different structures, different regions, and organizations that are in different places in their journey in philanthropy. So starting with you, Kevin, if we could just take a moment and have each of you share for a couple of minutes who you are, a little bit about your story, and a little bit about what makes your organization unique.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole. And it is a real joy to be with you today. I have the honor of bringing a regional perspective to this conversation, meaning that my organization funds in Oregon, but also in 7 other states. And I think the best way into who we are is to explain why that is. So the Northwest Area Foundation, despite our somewhat confusing name, is a private foundation with roots in a particular family. And that family is the family of James J. Hill, the railroad entrepreneur. His son, Louis W. Hill, established our organization about 80 years ago. James J. Hill built a rail line called the Great Northern Railway that connected the Twin Cities of Minnesota to Seattle and Portland, opening up the northwest area of North America to economic development, to resource extraction, to settlement by people of European origin. His enterprise had a tremendous impact on this region. And one of the ways we like to think about this at the Northwest Area Foundation is that there's a profound and continuing connection between that asset that the Hill family developed. Their wealth, their success is profoundly connected to the history and the current situation of communities all across our 8-state section of the country. In other words, today's patterns of inequity, today's barriers to opportunity for communities of color, as well as for rural people and others across our region, are connected to this story of the railroad. These aren't separate stories, it's all one story. So we believe in owning that story, recognizing that today's conditions have a history and a structure, and we want to figure out ways to disrupt that structure and move that history in a more positive direction. We share the view with many others in this room, I know, that equity is the superior growth model. That is the future for our country, is greater equity, leveraging our remarkable diversity, because it is our country's greatest strength. Our greatest resource is our multiple perspectives. So we invest in change makers, people who are disrupting poverty and helping low-income people and communities build their assets. We focus particularly, as you heard at the beginning, on good jobs and financial capability. We think that those pieces are the levers that can position people to participate in the mainstream economy and to thrive on their own terms. So that's a little bit about who we are. I'd love to say more, but I think I should stop and turn it back to Nicole.
If we could have Sharon, Keith, and Max.
I think it's perfect that, in fact, I will take the last of what Kevin said, is disrupting the status quo and making change. I'm the eldest of 4 daughters of Frederick Douglass Gary and Bobby Lou Gary, and I'm their first disruptor. And I've been a social justice activist, organizing, moving, promoting, and believing that we can do much better than the way that we often do for so many or don't do. And I am proud to head MRG Foundation, which in fact is Oregon's leading social justice funder, where racial, social, economic, and environmental justice is always the menu that we serve. And so I'm really proud, as a native-born Oregonian who's African-American and vertically challenged, that my view of the world has always been it can be larger, more inclusive, more equitable, and I have some ideas and get to work in a foundation that has always used a racial and social justice lens to get to those who do the work on the ground, to move and push the levers, to transform the systems, and to bring justice in Oregon every day of our lives. I'm proud to be here.
Well, my name is Keith, and I am very proudly the president of United Way of the Columbia Willamette, and have been for 3 years. And I think my opportunity in coming to United Way was to take an organization with a great history and a great brand and really help it evolve for modern relevancy and impact. And that's exactly what I've been honored to do with a smart and talented team of partners. Really build a United Way that this community, this region can be exceptionally proud of. Modern, nimble, innovative, collaborative, entrepreneurial, We really want to position ourselves with humility and a collaborative spirit as a powerful community problem solver. An organization that sits uniquely at the intersection of the corporate sector and the donor sector, the social sector, nonprofit, government, school systems, and the philanthropic sector. And we really want to use our platform to set a table where those disparate partners can work together on our region's most entrenched issues. And for us, at the center of that is the disparities we see in the community. For us, part of a foundational commitment in our work is acknowledging that race is the #1 indicator of failure in our region, and that we've got to start to rewrite the script for our entire community, but specifically for our communities of color. So last year, we made a 10-year commitment to focus our resources and efforts on breaking the cycle of childhood poverty in the region. And we've assembled a team of exceptional partners, government, nonprofits, social sector, co-funders, and we're working to go beyond. We're investing heavily in our partners, building their capacity, but what we're really asking them to do is work with us in a collective impact model to start to build a regional framework that gets at the systems level, the population level outcomes and change that our kids and families need. It's big work, it's hard, it's complex, but I can't imagine more important work. And frankly, I think it's the work we all believe gets at building the Oregon we aspire to be in the decades ahead.
Great. So my name is Max Williams, and I'm the president and CEO of the Oregon Community Foundation. And to draw the distinction between Kevin's organization at the Northwest Area Foundation and the Oregon Community Foundation, we're a public foundation. So instead of one family and one donor's resources that is being put towards philanthropy, we represent literally thousands of Oregonians and families who have come to the Oregon Community Foundation to establish charitable funds for positive purposes. So our mission is to improve life in Oregon and to promote efficient and effective philanthropy. And that's the work that we do at the Oregon Community Foundation. We're a 40-year-old, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, a 40-year-old organization in Oregon, created in about 1973, and first grants being made in 1974 in a very modest way. And last year we were really gratified to be able to make grants and scholarships in excess of $80 million. It's a tremendous story of Oregonians really thinking about and being philanthropic with their work. We are statewide in our work, so we have 6 offices around the state. We work with lots of communities and lots of individuals and individual donors in communities all over Oregon. Our 40th anniversary gave us the opportunity to both relook at our strategic plan and begin a conversation about how we were addressing the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion as a foundation. And so I'm pleased to say that in our 40th anniversary, with the adoption of our new strategic plan, for the first time in the history of the foundation, our board of directors adopted a statement about equity, diversity, and inclusion that spells out for us our aspirational goals about how we do charitable giving and philanthropy in Oregon through the vehicle of the Oregon Community Foundation. We are certainly learning a lot along the way, and we have the opportunity to influence the donors and the donor families that we work with on this issue as well. So one of our goals is to really work in partnership, and we have with virtually everyone on this panel, and we'll continue to work in partnership to try to figure out how to address these persistent issues that we're talking about here today. And we'll have more chance to talk about that, I think, in a minute.
Thank you. So my first question actually goes to you, Keith. Oh, so some of our guests shared a little bit about the structure of their foundations, but Keith, you represent a unique organization because you have a large number of individual donors, and you actually also have a significant amount of support from corporate and business partners. Within the large number of donors and businesses that support you, there's actually quite a bit of diversity in political perspective and worldview, and yet you've made the case with your donors and your business partners to focus on racial equity in the context of poverty. Can you just tell us the case that you have made to your donors and your business partners that have gained you the endorsement to do this work?
Yeah, you know, for us at United Way, it begins with data. Our donors and our corporate partners make data-driven decisions every day. They expect us to make data-driven decisions and strategies with the resources we help them mobilize. And in this regard, the data is unassailable. Across every educational, economic, and health indicator, our communities of color fare worse than their white peers. The truth is that there are savage inequalities that are barriers that are getting in the way of our kids and families getting to the starting line. And a second piece of data that we share with our partners is that these same communities are our fastest growing demographics. These communities that were failing at a consistent and significant rate are becoming, over the next decades, our majority population. And so, as we go out and talk about our work, as we look to enroll people in it, we really work to make the moral, economic, and demographic case for the work as smart work and smart investment. We think the moral case is easy. I mean, it really mirrors the American ideal that every kid and every family deserves a fair shot. But for us at United Way, just as important is that economic and demographic case. The data tells us that we're leaving a generation of kids and families behind. And if we don't address these disparities today, we can't afford the cost over the next 10 to 20 years. And we're talking about, lost opportunity in terms of workforce readiness, in terms of folks who can invest in our tax base, in terms of economic and buying power, not to mention the exponential growth of government and social service costs. So, part of our case is that we simply can't afford not to rewrite the script for these kids and families. So however you come to it, morally, economically, demographically, we all agree that the Oregon we want to build in the decades ahead has got to be a place where all kids and families can thrive. And that resonates. People believe that.
Thank you. So our next question is actually for you, Kevin. So you serve an 8-state region, and there's diversity in size. You serve many urban communities, rural communities. I believe you have about 75 sovereign nations in your region. And one of the challenges philanthropy faces often is really understanding perspective from communities and figuring out how to make wise investments. How do you, in the large scope of your foundation, really think about building relation in communities so that you can make wise decisions and connect with communities?
Yeah, it's that imperative to build real relationships and to make wise funding decisions. That is the most difficult thing about any kind of philanthropy. Our regional profile just tees up that challenge for us in a particular way. We work very hard to make sure we listen first to communities, to organizations that we're visiting with, rather than showing up from out of town with a strategy and a solution. But we also attempt to maintain discipline and focus about what we're interested in supporting. So that the trick becomes finding people across that vast section of the country that we work in whose mission is the same as ours. Their sense of what gets them out of bed in the morning aligns with our sense of where we want to place our limited resources. As Nicole said, it's not just that it's an 8-state section of the country. There are 75 sovereign native nations in that footprint. There are vibrant urban communities and vast rural sections of the country. We try to leverage all of that diversity as a strength. Because we work across that large geography, there are times when we can spot patterns and be of service in ways that might not occur to people the same way locally. We have a kind of bird's eye view that we try to turn into a strength. So a couple of simple examples. We've been supportive of Hacienda CDC's development of a Latino Mercado here in Portland, which will debut tomorrow. That made a lot of sense to us because we've seen it work beautifully in the Twin Cities. The Latino Economic Development Corporation in the Twin Cities and a number of partners have brought a Latino Mercado to life in our home community as an avenue for Latino entrepreneurs to build their businesses, build their assets, serve their community. Another example that has to do with Portland is that the Coalition of Communities of Color here in Portland and elsewhere in Oregon is a shining example of what can happen when diverse communities of color come together for research, advocacy, and action. The strength in numbers is palpable in that organization. We were able to do a learning visit between the Twin Cities and Portland to tee up that example and help our neighbors in Minnesota see whether there was something they could learn from what was going on here in Oregon. So those are examples of making use of the puzzle that you mentioned, Nicole. But in any philanthropy, being in authentic relationship with people, listening carefully to needs in community, those issues never stop being urgent, and that is true for us as it is for everybody.
Okay, Sharon, here's a question coming your way. So last year we spent an upwards of $250 million in philanthropic giving. It's a lot of resources going to a lot of different places. And of all of our partners on the stage today, MRG's been in the business of social justice and making impact and inequality the longest. So could you share a couple shining examples or bright stars in the work that you've seen?
My first instinct is, okay, how do you distill nearly 40 years of bright examples? But what comes to mind and what I think is timely and current is that MRG is a seeding funder. It goes in and puts money into the groups on the ground, the community-based organizations that do the work, that mobilize, that gain their neighbors' trust, that see a problem and gaps that are not being filled. And what comes to mind is the CAUSA Oregon Latino statewide organizing, where we came to them when they literally were volunteer-based, where so many people were committed and went forward, but they didn't have resources or infrastructure. They didn't have what today everyone has to have as a website, and they were people to people. That organizing, that mobilizing, that educating has allowed CAUSA to not only push back, I believe it's 20 anti-immigrant bills in the Oregon legislature, which means people who might be dispossessed to some of us, who are marginalized and oppressed, learn the system and understand how to push policy forward. And now they are on the national stage as well, being looked at as Oregon organization that mobilizes, educates, and then pushes policy forward so that we become the state and this country becomes the state it could be. The other organization would be the Center for Intercultural Organizing, CIO, that emerged as a result of 9/11 and the misplaced anger and the marginalizing of people who were Muslim or assumed to be Muslim in this country. And these groups that are immigrants and refugees organized, mobilized, shared their stories, the fears for their families, and we saw in them innate leadership and credibility, and we seated them and funded them, and we stay with groups, giving them the money so they can use it the way they want to use it, and not maybe the way that we as a funder might assume they need to use it. That CIO has become such a statewide organization, bringing together immigrants and refugees, and now is at the forefront in the Oregon legislature, pushing forward ending racial profiling, in collaboration, in coalition. And so those are just two of a number of shining examples in early money like yeast, in for the long haul, general support, not special project money, so that they can build base, I see hands, so that they can build a base because we trust that the communities have the leadership, the knowledge, and the credibility to know what they need to use the money for. And then watching them organize with others, multi-issue, cross-sectional, intersectional, so that we achieve the Oregon that we want and that we also move our region and our country.
So Max, I have a question for you. So Even today, as I sit here, I'm struck by our panel because our panel is actually significantly more diverse than what you might see if you went to a typical gathering of foundation presidents. It's very exciting that today on our panel we have a leader of African American heritage, a leader from Armenian Iranian heritage, I believe there's some Italian as well, Keith, and a Native American person as well. And I know, actually, Kevin and Max, you guys bring a lot of diversity and perspective as well. But we're not your typical group of presidents. And actually, when you look at leadership in philanthropy, from the president level to the senior level, there's still a lot of opportunity to improve as far as having leaders who really reflect who our region is. So tell me about some of the things that you've been part of or seen that have really inspired you to really think about changing the demographic of leadership in philanthropy, and also share with us your personal leadership journey.
Okay. No, I appreciate the question, Nicole, and I think you are right. I think philanthropy is working through this issue generally about how to be more representative of the communities that make up those communities that we serve, and I think it is a challenge. I guess I'd also say that from a perspective of the Oregon Community Foundation, I think we're very careful to approach this conversation with a lot of humility. There's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we have to learn as we move through this process. I've had the opportunity over the last year and a half or so to participate in a cohort of foundation leaders in the Pacific Northwest, including some foundation leaders from Alaska, along with Doug Stamm from Oregon with the Meyer Memorial Trust, in exactly this purpose, to have these conversations about how equity, diversity, and inclusion is changing in philanthropy, and how leaders need to be the ones, the leaders of those foundations need to be the ones that are driving that change. It's a difficult conversation to have when you come from a majority white privileged sense to be at the forefront of trying to make this change organizationally. And I think that's really where the acknowledgement of humility comes from. And Kevin kind of hit it on the head. It's a lot about listening. It's a lot about taking time. And for me, it's a lot about making sure that it's not a one-time sense that we're going to fix this over a weekend or over 6 months. This is a long-term problem, and it's only going to be solved by long-term effort and long-term investment, which means leadership has to take a part of owning that responsibility. And I think that's the responsibility of every CEO, of every foundation, to own that and then work for ways to make it happen. For my own journey, the challenges I think that we faced organizationally were to simply just acknowledge that this was a challenge that we had organizationally, and we needed to begin investing in ways to better understand how to deal with it. And that's everything from allocating budget resources to do better data collection, to working specifically on hiring policies and practices, the adoption, for example, of our own statement about equity, diversity, and inclusion by our board of directors, even though it somehow seems a little ceremonial, is really an important message not only to ourselves internally, but also to our donor base, that this is an area that we're very consistently committed to moving forward. I've also seen it evidence itself as we empower people within our organization with this vision to start to impact how we consider grant making. So virtually every grant evaluation that we do now at the Oregon Community Foundation is being looked at through this lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Every major initiative that the board of directors has authorized to go forward on that are our proactive initiatives are targeted with an EDI lens that we're applying in that strategy. Now, I can promise you we're not going to get it all right, and we've made mistakes already. And in fact, I'll tell the story of the mistake that we made when we adopted our EDI statement, because I think it's just typical of how this works. We worked for months and months on developing this EDI statement. We shopped it out to the community and got a lot of impact, and it had a lot of conversations about making sure that we had made it as inclusive as possible. When it went to print, we had left out the disability community in the list of identified areas that we were focused on. And it took about 15 minutes for them to start to tell us that we had left them out. And I don't say that by way of criticism. I actually think it's a good thing. They were there quickly to tell us that we had missed a very clear community that needed to be included in our statement about EDI. And we had that conversation almost immediately as a board and quickly moved to amend the statement and adopt it, and are really quite grateful for that sort of response that we got back to help teach us better ways to communicate and talk with one another about these issues. But it's also that risk that every organization takes when it steps out to try to do this work. And I guess my message is simply that as we take those risks, we have to be willing to sometimes make those mistakes and then still be committed to moving forward with the work. And I can promise you it won't be the first mistake or the last mistake that we've made as a foundation as we continue to do this work. So long as we're willing to listen to each other and take the time to understand where we're each coming from and then move forward, we're going to make progress, and we feel very committed to that going forward. So.
All right, Keith. So one thing that I and many others have noticed is that in the new United Way, you've actually initiated several partnerships and a real increase in partnerships with culturally specific organizations. And culturally specific organizations are really defined as organizations who are really owned by and led by the communities that they seek to serve. So can you share a little bit about why that's been important to you all as you implement your new strategy?
Sure. Yeah, we began our work by making an explicit statement about the important and unique role that culturally specific organizations have in serving our kids and families of color. And there too, it began with data. These are organizations that have a demonstrated track record of getting outsized outcomes for their communities. So as the larger system fails these kids and families, our culturally specific organizations are doing critical work to deliver the educational, economic, and health outcomes their communities need. So as we built our Breaking the Cycle cohort and collaborative, I mean, Max referred to humility. United Way doesn't have the answers. We're trying to set a table, and we wanted to make sure to begin with organizations that have shown they do have the answers. They're of their communities, they're working for their communities feel safe and empowered working with them. So we wanted to make sure to invest in organizations that have been working in the African American, Latino, Native American, immigrant communities for years. And we're proud of those partnerships. Now, what I will say, there's also a really critically important role to be played by culturally responsive organizations. And culturally responsive organizations are organizations that have historically been dominant culture organizations, but these are organizations that have recognized a couple things. First of all, that the Oregon we have been is not the Oregon we are, and certainly not the Oregon we are becoming. And they are also organizations that have been willing to evolve their practice, their leadership, their hiring, their culture to better serve the modern, diverse Oregon. And so as we work with our partners, we're really focused on three things. First, increasing the capacity of our culturally specific organizations. We know they're moving the needle for kids and families of color. We've got to build their horsepower to do more and better work. Second, working with them to identify the aspects of their practice that are working. What's their special sauce? What's the effective practice they're using to get such strong outcomes in their communities? And third, working with them likewise to build a playbook to help bring that to scale in our large, mainstream, culturally responsive organizations. And in that, we think is the potential game changer. When we can build a region where all our nonprofits, not just our culturally specific, but all our nonprofits, our government partners, we in philanthropy have elevated our capacity to effectively serve all our kids and families of color, we think then we're going to start to see the kind of population level change we need as a region. And so as we work on our Breaking the Cycle agenda with our partners, that's the bullseye we're working toward.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and get a little bit more specific with you, Kevin. You mentioned that you 40% of your dollars go specifically to Native communities. And I know that that hasn't always been the case. And so I'd love if you'd be willing to share a little bit about your journey to get to that place. And what are some of the really exciting things that you've learned? What's been challenging about that? And if you could just share some insight, because I believe you may be one of the largest majority culture foundations or largest contributors to Native communities in the country. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Our organization has tried to be of use in Indian country for decades. This is not a new commitment for us. When I arrived at Northwest Area Foundation in 2008, it was already the case that over the previous decade, we had devoted about 30% of our resources to Indian country. We were very proud of that. We often led with it when people asked us what we were all about. What we recognized was that if that was going to remain true, we needed to get more intentional, more focused, more deliberate about finding excellent partners to work with in Indian country. So in a way that is kind of not typical for philanthropy, we just picked a number. We just said, let's take it up a notch. Let's do 40%. Let's see if we can do that and make it impactful. That's how we got to 40%. There was no magic to it. We were already at 30% and we wanted to do more. So 2015 will be our 4th year of devoting 40% of our new grant dollars to Native-led organizations. And I want to make that distinction clear. We're talking about Native-led organizations when we say 40% to Indian country, meaning that the executive leadership and the board of our grantees are Native people. This is funding the community itself. If we were to make a grant, there are some very admirable things being done by non-Native people relative to Indian country at Harvard University, at the Aspen Institute, et cetera. But if we funded one of those efforts, we wouldn't count that towards this 40% commitment. We are serious about placing the resources with the community. It's really important to understand that that funding commitment is just part of a larger whole for us. We have for years had Native people on our board of directors, not as tokens, not as one person in the room. Currently there are 4 Native Americans on our board of directors out of 16. We have for years had more than one Native program officer. We have had a Native American on our executive committee. The founding chair of our program committee is a woman named Elsie Meeks from South Dakota, who some of you may know. She has some Portland connections as well. So this is central to who we are, to how we think about our role in the world. And Nicole, you asked about things that have been exciting and energizing around this. One of the things we try to be disciplined about is that we don't want to be just another voice talking about the trauma and the difficulty. The statistics in Indian country are terrible and are daunting. There was a White House convening on Native youth 2 days ago where those statistics were very much in the air. Statistics about suicide, about poverty, et cetera. We're not for a second denying those harsh realities, but there is another story about innovation in Indian country, about the vibrancy of Native youth who are rising to leadership positions in their communities. We view Indian country as a place of opportunity and innovation. We view it as underinvested space. It's a tremendous opportunity for philanthropy to make a positive difference. We've seen this, we're interested in proving it and sharing it. I once was in a conversation with a pretty senior person at one of the major foundations in this country, somebody I know well and really respect, and he said sort of in a confidential tone, you know, the people I work for, meaning the people who lead his foundation, are not compelled by statements of need. They're compelled by opportunity for impact. When we think about our work in Indian country, we want to be one of those voices saying the story of Indian country is early in its development. There is a future for these communities that can be vibrant, thriving on their own terms. What we mean when we say prosperity really is possible in Indian country, but we didn't get to where we are today by accident. That story has a structure and a history that needs to be addressed so that we can move past it. So the most recent analysis that was done by Native Americans in Philanthropy and the Foundation Center about mainstream philanthropy's giving to Indian country suggested that less than 0.5% of mainstream philanthropy's resources goes to Indian country. Less than 0.5%. That's astonishing, inappropriate, to use a mild word for it. So we're putting 40% there. We simply want to try to see if we can bring others along with us. Thanks.
So, Sharon, I'm going to put you in an awkward position of asking you to answer one question, and I think you have about 1.5 minutes, which is, we have a lot of philanthropic leaders in the audience today. You have your peers on the stage. You've sort of been the longest at this, as has MRG. Do you have any short advice you'd like to give us and our colleagues in the audience?
I think I would say what a financial advisor would say: be bold, do the homework, because all of the grants we give, that's investing. And how do you invest? You get good information, you practice due diligence, you take a chance, and we're taking a chance on people, those who are the most often marginalized, not heard. We are a listening, learning, and leading foundation around racial, social justice. We collaborate more. I heard my colleagues talk about it, and I'm really honored that MRG is entering into a collaborative relationship with a major funder who happens to be in the room, Meyer Memorial Trust, not just giving us money to build the capacity of groups on the ground, those grassroots groups who are ready to scale up, who've demonstrated they're filling gaps. Be transparent about the fact we can't fund anything and everything, but we can fund a lot more if we get the practice of listening to the people who are doing the work. And change our philanthropic sector to look more like this stage and more like this audience and less like the past.
Thank you to all of our panelists. At this point, we have an opportunity to open up the mic for questions and answers. We have 15 minutes to do so, and certainly if you'd like to write a question and put it on an index card, City Club staff would be happy to pick that up from you. Asking questions is a privilege of City Club membership, and we would love to invite the first question.
Thank you, City Club member. Thank you very much for the program today. It was very informative. However, we're at a moment in our society where one of the biggest racial justice issues of our generation is in front of us, and it's the issue of holding police accountable for how they engage and interact with community members, especially community members of color. With the exception of one or two of you on the stage, foundations are a giant conglomerate that's hard to move to be responsive to the issue of the day. And so my question to you is, have you seen two films, Alien Boy and Arresting Power, which are both about police violence here locally? And B, how can you be responsive to putting money on the ground to assist people who are trying to get justice that has been long denied? Thank you.
So I'm going to invite either Max or Keith to respond to that.
First, I want to say I appreciate the question from my good friend Joanne, who served with me in the legislature. So I should have anticipated that this question was coming. You know, so in answer to your question, Joanne, I have not seen either of the movies that you've identified, but if you think I should watch them, I'll take your advice and I will. Okay, good. You invite me to a showing and I'll be happy to come. I think your second question about how organizations that are trying to raise these issues of social justice, particularly in that field, accesses a larger foundation like ours. You know, that's a complex question. I can tell you that because we represent thousands of donors who have different interests, I think the issue is to present those in a way that those like-minded donors who have interest in supporting that work could use their funds to recommend grants to do just that. It's a little more challenging, I think, at the larger scale when we're representing so many people to figure out exactly how to access particular programs around the advocacy and policy issue. But it's not an area that we're unaware of, obviously, and one that we're following. And you and I both know that because we've spent time talking about it. But you invite me to the movies, and I'll come with you. I'll buy the popcorn.
Well, you mentioned putting resources on the ground, and honestly, I think the answers to some of these entrenched challenges we face don't begin and end with dollars. I mean, philanthropy's been making grants for decades, and that's not changing the system. So my belief, my hope, and I'm seeing this among the partners in this room and on the stage, is that we've got to begin to augment our investments with our willingness to play a convening role, to bring partners collectively together, to start to aggregate their data collectively and look at the picture it's painting for us as a region, and then importantly, use our brands, our bully pulpits, to tell a story that informs advocacy and policy, because that's, I believe, where you start to change systems. And honestly, United Way heretofore has not been an active advocate or policy leader. And part of my conversation with my board is if we want to get at systems change in the community, we've got to step forward into that space. As we make these investments, we've got to be willing to use our brand to inform policy and advocacy decisions at the highest levels, because then we can start to change the legislative barriers that are keeping too many kids and families back. We can address some of these criminal issues that we see. We can address the fact that we are building a prison pipeline that is disproportionately people of color. That's where I think we start to change the game, when we speak with one voice around those issues.
Thank you. We'd love to invite the next question.
All right. Well, hello, my name is Noe Alonso. I'm a civic scholar from David Douglas High School. And I had a question. How are you, as major organizations, collaborating to make a bigger impact in the community?
I just mentioned the recent award to MRG by Meyer Memorial Trust. And what that says is that funders can examine and learn together to maximize resources to the groups that are on the ground who move from just survival or pushing against the gaps, the inequities, to actually developing the sense of expertise where their voices are listened to, where policy gets moved. I mentioned CIO and other groups that are down with friends in the legislature moving the end to racial profiling, which is a significant contributor to the killing of young black men and older black men and black women as well in this country. And you've seen it on TV, but we also have seen it in Portland, Oregon. So the idea that we can collaborate, use our best thinking, that data-driven analysis, and that sense of what's really going on the street, in the communities, in a way that can inform others. There are more partners, and certainly we're seeking partners. If this can be scaled up, there are those who are thinking about looking at us nationally. What could this do if people recognize that you start here in community? You collaborate, you have funders learning cohorts. We've developed one within GOSW, the grant makers, Oregon, Southwest Washington, to look at black male achievement and black males in peril. And I, of course, always add black women and girls and daughters and community. And what does that say to the majority community? That none of us are safe if none of us are safe. And so those are the ways that we're being strategic and intentional and always leading with the racial social justice analysis, which is a strong and powerful analysis, as my colleagues have said.
Invite the next question, please.
Hi, I'm Dante James, City Club member. First, thank you for the panel and thank you for the excellent questions, Nicole. I think it's brought out a lot. We are here because there are disparities. There are disparities in philanthropy. There are disparities in who is funded, in what the boardrooms look like, what the leadership looks like. And so I don't think that's the issue. The question I have for you is, how is it so difficult to change those disparities? Why is it so difficult to change those disparities? What are the barriers maintaining the status quo? And lots of questions, I guess. What are you doing to be intentional about removing those and funding the euphemistic, culturally specific, meaning organizations led by the people of the communities they come from, people of color? What are you doing to be intentional about removing those barriers and changing the inequities that currently exist, and what's so difficult about it?
So, Kevin, I'm going to give you the first opportunity.
It seems to me that in terms of the last part of your question, and thank you for the excellent question, the question of what are the barriers that are preventing funders from funding the community's representatives more, funding organizations of color, funding people of color directly. There's no one answer to that. I think that there's a perception that that kind of funding is somehow risky. You often hear lingo like, well, there's just not capacity in the community to carry out X, Y, or Z. I just think we as funders need to question all of those assumptions. The 40% commitment in Indian country I was talking about before for Northwest Area Foundation has required us to just think more creatively about, well, what are we looking for when we say capacity? Maybe we can build some and then fund it. And this question of risk, foundations don't take enough of the right kind of risk, I think I would say. There's a tremendous risk to continuing to do what we've always done. The risk is we'll get where we're headed, which is a more unequal society, a less productive and less just society. That's a big risk that none of us should be interested in running. So I think we need to also rethink what we mean by risky. Long-term change doesn't come in 6-month increments or 2-year increments. Things take time. What I try to do and what I would advise others to do is act on your values. That is, make funding decisions that support the kind of future you want to be a part of building and that express the identity of your organization at a values level, and worry about that at least as much as the question of what are we going to get in terms of short-term outcomes. I mentioned that our organization began with the entrepreneurial vision of a railroad baron. You talk about thinking big. You talk about being willing to make disruptive change. That's in our DNA. We need to tap back into that. Yes, humility is very important. We don't want to be grandiose. We don't want to be megalomaniacs, but we also need to be willing to think big and push the envelope and try things that might fail. That's actually all right, because staying the course is a huge risk.
We'd love to invite the next question.
Hi, Valerie Plummer, City Club member. First, I just wanted to say thanks for the conversation, and I actually wish that Nicole was kind of answering all of the questions that she was also posing, because I like you as a facilitator, but I also want to hear about Northwest Health Foundation a bit. Anyway, my question is regarding the conversation of equity and specifically people with disabilities. I'm interested, if you look at the data, people with disabilities are pretty shockingly high rates of unemployment and really high rates of poverty. And I was just curious if any of you have thought through or had conversations about how to include that population, if you will, as part of the equity conversation.
I can certainly say with MRG Foundation that not only do we fund groups that represent disability community, but we have also been looking at, if we were to look forward, we are actually looking at how do we ensure that how people recognize, assume, or name disability is claimed and named by those whose experience is living it every day. How do we get informed, and then how do we share with our colleagues what is in fact the way the community wants to be heard? And there are various communities in the disability community? And what about the intersections if you're disabled and a person of color or a newly arrived person in this country, a country that always welcomed immigrants until? So we ask those kinds of questions as well, so that we are not just speaking from a place of privilege because we have the dollars, but that we're being informed and constantly evolving, as Kevin has said, and my colleagues, that what we know today is going to be different maybe in 10 years, but certainly in 5 years. How do we keep moving, informing, learning, and then how do we put the money to that? We're also looking at how do we inform and have a practice of a safe workplace environment so that all folks are able to be safe, engaged, informed, and their leadership to rise, all communities. That takes a lot of work, a lot of practice. My mother used to say, fall, if you're gonna fall down, fall forward. You'll be farther than you would have been. And equity requires a lot of falling forward. I would challenge you, how do you go back from here today and talk among your colleagues and friends about what shook you in this conversation and what has given you a sense of, I can do that, so that we change not just the room of the City Club, but the conversations in Portland that move philanthropy and government and all the people forward.
I apologize to the folks interested in asking a question. We have ran out of time, but I hope you all will join me in thanking and appreciating our amazing panel.
And I will give you one more opportunity to do that. As we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Sharon Gary Smith, Keith Tomajan, Kevin Walker, Max Williams, and Nicole Maher. Thank you.